And we are live with Northern Kentucky History Hour. We're going to let all of our Zoom guests into the meeting. Good evening and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. We are going to let everyone into the meeting and then we will get started. If you need to, please mute your microphone. Good evening. Welcome. If you're just joining us, we are just going to let everyone into the Zoom here and then we will get started.
Hello.
Welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. We're just letting everyone into the meeting and then we will get started. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, if you're just joining us, this is Behringer Crawford Museum's Northern Kentucky History Hour. Looks like it's going to be a sellout crowd tonight at our maximum number of 100 guests. So we are glad that you all made it. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Tara Johnson-Nome. I am a member of Behringer Crawford Museum's Board of Trustees. I'm actually serving as the vice chair this year. I see a number of other trustees here with us tonight. And so I just want to say welcome to all of you and thank you so much to the trustees, to the museum staff, and to all of our supporters who support Behringer Crawford Museum, especially in this tricky time when many of us cannot get out and gather as we would like. Northern Kentucky History Hour has been a project for 30 weeks now. We've had 30 episodes and we're so glad to have you with us. Just want to say a couple housekeeping items and then we will get started. We are so grateful for our financial supporters. Behringer Crawford Museum is supported in part by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation, and our members. If you are a member, thank you so much. It means a lot to us, and we know that you're benefiting from a lot of different programming that we have available at the museum and virtually. If you're not a member yet, you can find out how to join. Let's see if I can fix our screen here really quickly. If you're not a member yet, we can let you know how to join by going to bcmuseum.org. Let's see, what else? Also, a few reminders. Everyone's microphone has been muted, and you're welcome to turn off your video if you would like. Just so you know, on some devices, even if you can't see others, we might be able to see you depending on what you're using. So welcome to turn off your video if you would like, but we do want you to participate in the conversation by using the chat. If you're not familiar with the chat feature, it's at the bottom of your screen. It's probably like a little word bubble. You can enter comments, questions, and we will read them all. I'll compile them and get them to Peter so that we can make sure that all of your interesting questions get asked. Also, if, let's see, if you want to learn more, we're going to talk about how to get a copy of the book at the end of the presentation here. So we will definitely let you know where to go for that. So, without further ado, I do want to introduce you to tonight's guest. I'm so excited about this presentation. I've been reading the book and it's just one of those tragic tales, but at the same time, we can't put it down, right? So Peter Bronson, author of Forbidden Fruit and several other books, was editorial page editor and columnist for the Cincinnati Enquirer for nearly 20 years. Under his leadership, the Enquirer was judged Best Editorial Page in Ohio 4 years in a row. Before coming to Cincinnati in 1992, he was editorial page editor and columnist at the Tucson Citizen in Tucson, Arizona. He started his news career in Michigan after graduating from Michigan State University in his hometown of East Lansing, Michigan. He has served on several nonprofit boards, including Casa de los Niños, Home for Abused Children in Tucson, Northern Kentucky Children's Home, Leadership Cincinnati, and Cincinnati Right to Life. He was a regular panelist producer on Channel 9 WCPO TV show Hot Seat, and also on the weekly Tucson news show Arizona Illustrated. He has been a contributing editor and columnist at Cincy magazine, and now is owner and publisher of Chili Dog Press, LLC, which offers publishing, writing, editing, and consulting services. His 2005 book, Behind the Lines, The Untold Story of the Cincinnati Riots, was a regional bestseller. He is co-author of Legacy of Courage, True Stories of Honor Flight Veterans, and Legacy of Courage 2. Chili Dog Press has published dozens of books, including Judge Z, Irretrievably Broken, Dance When You Can, and the national award-winning Submerged. He is active as a group leader at Horizon Community Church, and he enjoys working on old sports cars, playing golf, and travel. He's the father of 2 and lives with his wife, Kathy, in Milford. Mr. Peter Bronson, welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. We are so happy to have you. Go ahead.
I'm very glad to be here, Tara. It's a delight, and it's really good to see those faces out there. In these days when we can't do public speaking in most cases, it's really nice to have a gathering like this to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is vivid local history. And it doesn't get any better than Northern Kentucky.
If you want, that's great. If you want to share your screen whenever you are ready, we can,
Okay.
You can do your presentation.
Working on it. And that should be it.
You are good to go. Looks great.
Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to be able to talk about this book. It's been such a joy to work on. The research has been almost as much fun as the writing, and the writing was so much fun. I felt really bad when the book ended because I had to publish it and say goodbye to my best friend that was there for me every morning after coffee to come down and work on it. I love this book and I love the stories. The research was really eye-opening for me. Here we have the cover, which it's a little thing, but I'd like to share with you how much goes into these books. My graphics guy, Andy Melcher, he worked really hard to get these dice on the cover to be clear as they were in the original Supper Club. So you can actually see through the dice. And I just think that was so cool that he did that. You can buy this book, a full color signed copy, at my website, which is chilidogpress.com, and $25 includes your shipping. And this is the full color copy. It's also available at Amazon, at Roebling Point Books in both Newport and Covington, and at Joseph Beth Books. But for the signed full color copies, I recommend going to my website. And in fact, I can personalize that for you if you give me a call. The reaction to the book has been much better than I could have expected. It's just been so much fun to share this and to meet people and talk about their stories. As I say in the introduction, there was nobody that I've met or gotten to talk to about this, it seems, in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky who was not brushed by history the night of this fire on May 28th, 1977. As many of you may recall, this picture of the flames at the Supper Club. It was Memorial Day weekend. It was the beginning of summer. It was such an exciting time. There were weddings at the club. There were big parties of people who drove up from all over Northern Kentucky and throughout Ohio and the Midwest to be there to see John Davidson, who was a really big deal at the time. 165 people at least lost their lives. I say at least because there were probably 4 women who were pregnant and carrying children. So that number could be anywhere from 165 to 169 or 170 for all we know. This is a picture of the investigators as they sifted through the ashes the next day after the fire. And that task was something that none of them has ever forgotten. This is a look at what was collected from those ashes. And it was so touching for me to go through the list of these personal items that were found. We had boxes of sandals and purses and wallets and car keys that were never claimed, and eyeglasses and credit cards and pictures of their children in their wallets and purses. It was just, somehow these pedestrian, mundane little possessions of our everyday lives were so eloquent in speaking to the loss of these victims. Many of you, if you don't remember the fire, probably remember this monument on top of the Supper Club site that was put up as a memorial to the victims. And there's a separate story about that. Now, I set out to write about the fire, but I started out by going back to the first fire. And I was surprised at what I learned about that. This was the original Beverly Hills Country Club, long before it was the Supper Club. And this was owned by a guy named Pete Schmidt, who was a numbers runner and a mafia or organized crime guy. He wasn't really mafia because mafia didn't really come into the Midwest, which I will explain later at that time. And he had this wonderful roadhouse that he turned into the jewel of the Midwest. It was the finest entertainment casino in anywhere from miles around throughout the Midwest. And Pete Schmidt had a real jewel on his hands. Here he is at the Cincinnati or the Newport police station. And he was a good friend of the cops in many ways that you wouldn't expect, because the police at that time were completely corrupted, and they were owned by the organized crime guys like Pete Schmidt, who ran their casinos, and they had police, local elected officials, county elected officials, the sheriff's department. You could follow it right on up to the governor's office, and in some cases all the way to the White House. The corruption was like a cancer. Here's a picture of the interior of that club, and it shows you just a sample of just how beautiful it was. This was probably Pete Schmidt's big mistake. He made something too beautiful. And one of the people who came to see it was a guy named Mo Dalitz. Mo was the founder and leader of the Cleveland Four, which was given the Midwest territory when all of the organized crime figures from across the nation met at a summit or a convention and divided the country up into slices. And Mo Dalitz and the Cleveland Four were given Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky. And when he came to this club, he didn't really have a presence in Northern Kentucky yet. He had some presence in Ohio. And he saw this club and he decided he had to have it. Well, he made Pete Schmidt an offer that Pete eventually found out he couldn't refuse, but he did refuse, and he refused many times. And as a result, Mo Dalitz sent his guys to burn the club. The club was first burned in January of 1936, and that was the first death that we know of, when a little girl who was 5 years old was thrown out the window by her sister's boyfriend. She was staying overnight with them in the roadhouse, and the boyfriend was the caretaker there. And she didn't survive the fall, and she died of burns and head injuries a few days later. And that was a big story at the time, because this kind of thing just didn't happen. I mean, the actual burning out of clubs became a big thing later, but at that time it was quite a big story. And it really did cross the line. Even the police were, although they were corrupt, they were outraged that these guys would burn the club and actually kill a little girl. Here are the guys that were involved. There were 3 of them that were actually prosecuted. One of them was Edwin Garrison. Another one was Dave Whitfield. The third guy, Chick Deem, we couldn't find a mugshot of him. They were all known at the time as police characters, which was the headline writer's shorthand for mobsters or thugs. Edwin Garrison was burned badly in the fire, and he was found a few days afterwards in an attic. He'd been drugged up by a doctor who cooperated with the organized crime people, and he was raving, and he said to police, "I never killed a child before." He was prosecuted and sent to prison in a hurry and did his time. Dave Whitfield was one of the ringleaders of that arson. They used 5-gallon cans of gasoline and went in the back door of the club and poured the gasoline around. And apparently a pilot light set it off before they could get out. And that's how Garrison got burned. Whitfield fought much harder, and he had some mob lawyers who were local figures in Newport. One of them was Dan Davies, and the other guy was Charles Lester. These guys organized his defense, and he went through several trials, and eventually he also was sent to prison. Notably, he was close enough to the Cleveland mob that when he got out of prison and did his time, he was immediately hired as a manager for one of their clubs in northern Kentucky. About this time in Covington, which also had a big casino and mob problem, there was a judge who bucked everybody and fought back, and his name was Judge Johnst with an ST Northcote. As far as I know, there's no statue to him anywhere in northern Kentucky, but after I read the stories and researched his background and what he went through, I think there should be. He was probably the first of the good men who stood up to what was happening in Covington and Newport and throughout northern Kentucky. And for that, he eventually paid a price, but he was one heck of a brave guy. At one point, the mobsters accused him of railroading them by saying that he came along on raids and that he carried a machine gun. And at that point, he stopped the testimony to interject that I did not carry machine guns. They were discussed, but I carried a handgun. So, you know, this guy was something else. This is a picture of the Lookout House, which was the other premier club, which is known as a carpet joint. There were two kinds of clubs. There were bust out joints, which were the really rough, seedy, rigged, tough places where you could easily get your drink spiked and get rolled. And the reason they called it bust out joint is because you'd be busted when you got out. The carpet joints were run by the mob, and they were clean. They were high class, first class entertainment, the best entertainment they could find. Newport was Vegas before Vegas was cool. So people like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin actually worked at the Beverly Hills Country Club as a dealer. They performed in these clubs. They were first class all the way, and they were fantastic clubs. The Lookout House then became also attractive to the mob, and they decided they'd take it over, and they went to the guy who had started it, Buck Brady, and made a proposal again. He refused, and instead of going along with it, he grabbed a shotgun and two of his friends and hunted down Red Masterson, who had actually made the proposal. Red was known as the enforcer. He was the Cleveland mob's hitman in Newport and in northern Kentucky, and to the extent that he got in a shootout, basically one-sided, where a hitman from Chicago came looking for him. He walked up to him where the hitman was sitting in a cab at the curb in Newport in broad daylight, and with 238s shot him until he was entirely dead. And he was immediately released and no charges were brought. So that tells you a little bit about how corrupt things were. So Red Masterson was shot by Buck Brady, again on the streets of Newport in broad daylight. Red Masterson, when he was approached in the hospital, said he had no memory of it and no charges to file. He survived the shooting. Buck Brady was found hiding in an outhouse about 4 or 5 blocks from the shooting scene, and he was not prosecuted, but he quickly realized that if you don't kill Red Masterson, you better make a deal quick, and he did. And the Lookout House was eventually, at that point, turned over to the mob, with the middleman being that mob lawyer, Charles Lester. This is a picture of what the country club looked like when the mob ran it. This would be in the 60s. And as you can see, it looks like a country club. It was beautiful. It was a night on the town in your very best. You see the lady wearing a fur and the man is well dressed. I mean, it was first class all the way. People on both coasts knew about the Beverly Hills Country Club, and it was the destination of the nation. And in fact, it was Vegas before Vegas was cool. This is a picture of the place that Pete Schmidt opened after he was driven out of the country club. It was Glenn Schmidt's Rendezvous, which was named after his son, and eventually here became Glenn Schmidt's Platorium. And this was also a first-class nightclub, and the mob also moved in on that later. But Pete Schmidt managed to hang on to it with some cooperation with the Charles Lester and the Cleveland Four. Here's another guy. If you want to know how corrupt was Northern Kentucky, this is the guy who was the marshal of Wilder. He was known as Big Jim Harris, also Boss Man. He was also the guy that ran a brothel known as the Heidi Ho Club and a casino. And he did this openly. Everybody knew about it. He boasted at the time that he had $64,000 stuffed in his mattress. and that if anybody ever came after him, he could hire the best lawyers and manage to get himself off. And he did for the most part for years until some of his own employees finally testified against him and he went away, did some prison time for pandering and prostitution. In the early 1950s, the mob in America was exposed by a Tennessee senator named Estes Kefauver. Some of you may be old enough to remember the name of the Kefauver Commission. It was another national sensation. It was in the infancy of television. And the televised hearings with these mobsters appearing was just riveting. It hypnotized everybody. There are pictures in the newspapers of people crowded around store windows where TVs were on display playing these hearings, with people in offices, all the work stopped, in beauty parlors. There were actually cocktail parties where everybody gathered in the evening to see the replay of these hearings. And one of the stars here on this right of the screen here is Modalis. He was charming, funny, and completely, entirely dishonest. He lied about everything they asked him and basically walked away. At about this same time, after the Kefauver hearings in the early 60s, the name of George Ratterman is well known in Northern Kentucky. He's a hero. Everybody knows the story or may have heard it about him being framed up by Tito Carinci and April Flowers, and that he was given chloral hydrate knockout drops. In this picture, in the headline, he's shown holding up his torn trousers that were ripped off him by two police officers, Newport cops, who were waiting by the phone to come drag him away and accuse him of morals charges and ruin his political career because he was running for sheriff. And the Committee of 500 reform movement was really catching fire. Ratterman was a star quarterback at Notre Dame, a star in the NFL, and he decided to run for sheriff and clean up Northern Kentucky. What many people may not know, and what came as a surprise to me, was just how much help Ratterman had from the new Attorney General in the Kennedy administration, Bobby Kennedy. We see here a picture of Ron Goldfarb, who was the chief deputy to Bobby Kennedy. Remember, this happened in April, and John Kennedy had only taken office in that January, on Inauguration Day of January 20th. So he had appointed his brother only weeks before this. And when they saw this headline about George Ratterman, such as the one we see here, Bobby Kennedy sent Ron Goldfarb to Newport to declare war on organized crime. And what later becomes so telling in the book and in my research is that this was the declaration of war against the Mafia and against organized crime by Bobby Kennedy that my research showed, and I'll explain later, eventually led to the killing of Jack Kennedy. So Newport played a much bigger role in national affairs than we probably thought, or at least that I ever knew. Ron Goldfarb led the prosecution of Tito Carinci and his associates, and was eventually able to send Charles Lester to prison along with Tito Carinci and others, and on civil rights violations for what they did to George Ratterman. Meanwhile, Bobby Kennedy escalated his war on the mob by going after Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa was up to his ears in the Mafia. His Teamsters pension fund was basically used to build Las Vegas. Golf courses, casinos. Modalis was very close to Jimmy Hoffa, along with Sam Giancana in Chicago and other mobsters across the country. And they had a pipeline into the Teamsters pension fund. And Jimmy Hoffa was Bobby Kennedy's enemy to the point where they almost came to physical altercations. They hated each other. They swore vendetta against each other. Bobby Kennedy embarrassed Jimmy Hoffa many times, and Jimmy Hoffa threatened that he would get even, and eventually he did. Meanwhile, there's another whole face of the Kennedy administration, which was Jack Kennedy at his Newport compound in Newport, Rhode Island. This was the glamour side of the Kennedys, while meanwhile, his brother was fighting this gritty, ugly underworld war against organized crime. And that is my research, I thought, proved beyond any doubt for me that this is what brought the Kennedys down. Here's Jack Kennedy coming to Newport when he was campaigning in 1960. This photo, I think, is especially poignant because it shows him riding in the back of an open car. This kind of campaign was very common at the time, that the candidate would come into town this way, leading a motorcade, as you see here. Of course, that all ended on November 22nd, 1963, and you will never see candidates in an open car like this again, because Jack Kennedy was shot in just such a position, and it's almost like bookends on the Kennedy story. Here we see George Ratterman, long after Bobby Kennedy prosecuted these guys and sent them to jail. He was still fighting the good fight. He had to hire his own entirely new slate of deputies, his own untouchables at the sheriff's department. And here he went in to serve a warrant on Screw Andrews, who became one of the big mob kingpins in Newport. And while he was serving that warrant, the Newport police ticketed his car. And here's a picture of Ratterman coming out to find that the Newport police were still doing the work of the mob. When Ratterman and Kennedy finally pushed out organized crime such as modalists, who they all went to Las Vegas because it was a lot easier to do everything they needed to do there, and it was legit, more or less. They got their skim, they bought all the politicians, gambling was legal, so they were just fine. What happened then to Newport was something that I call the disorganized crime era, which was the porn empire moved in. So we had continuous adult entertainment like this sign, but every block in Newport was riddled with these adult nightclubs, full nude dancing. It was a dark period of Newport history, and that brought along some reformers whose story is also told. In 1969, Dick Schilling bought the Supper Club, which was abandoned at the time, had been closed down. He sold the Lookout House, which burned, and bought the abandoned Supper Club. And while he was renovating it, it was burned. It was no doubt to be arson. It was the second arson of the Supper Club. And there was a can of gas left right in the middle of the floor. The local police chief, Southgate police chief, said there was no doubt in his mind that it was arson. He complained that the state police covered it up, whitewashed it, delayed the investigation. The fix was in, but somebody was telling Dick Schilling they did not want him to have this supper club and that he had to partner up with them or else. And then we see what happened in 1977. Here we see pictures of the fire at the supper club as it burned. We see volunteers and firefighters and EMTs and rescue workers carrying away bodies. The people that were trapped in the club, in many cases, had no chance at all if they were in the cabaret room. The young man who came in to tell everybody to leave is Walter Bailey. He was a teenage hero because nobody else went into the cabaret room to warn people, and he took it on himself as a busboy to go up on the stage during a comedy act and interrupt everybody and ask them calmly to leave the room. Unfortunately, people in those days, there was a lot of heavy drinking, just as there is today, but much more so, I'd say, and a lot of smoking. And so a lot of people thought this was just part of the comedy act, or they were had a few drinks too many and laughed it off and said, hey, let's wait for everybody else to leave and then we'll go out easier. As it turned out, seconds made the difference in life and death. And so many of those people that delayed or waited too long never made it out. Here we see what happened the day after. Take a look at this picture on the right, and you can see how a big bite has been taken out of one specific section of the supper club. That section is the zebra room where the fire originated. And it seems when you see this heavy equipment here, the clamshell crane tearing up the zebra room, it was immediately the focus of demolition. And the arson investigators who were part of the fire marshal office at that time said that they tried to go to the governor and say, this is arson. We need to make this a crime scene and investigate arson. because many eyewitnesses said the fire spread way too fast to be anything else. He was told to shut up. We're not going to let this be an arson. And this is turned over to the Kentucky State Police. And the demolition proceeded, and what could have been a crime scene of probably the biggest mass murder in national history up to that point, and in many ways the biggest fire arson mass murder in history, were immediately destroyed. The crime scene was no more. This is a picture that was taken by the Kentucky State Police and covered up for probably 20 years. The Kentucky State Police took numerous, probably thousands of pictures in the basement below the zebra room. And for years, they claimed that there was no evidence of fire in that basement below the zebra room. But take a look at this picture. On that wall to the left, you see the scorch marks of an intense blaze going up the wall. In the air handling system, just to the rear of that, you see where the air handling system, the ductwork has been blown open. You see scorch marks on the ductwork above it, scorch marks and evidence of fire throughout the room. So this picture was only finally pried loose from the Kentucky State Police by a couple of people who were tireless investigators. One of them is David Brock. He was a busboy who was there that night and has never believed that it was an accident. And he eventually, through lawsuits with a friend of his, Tom McConaughey, they recovered these photos so that we can look at them today. Here's a close-up of that air handling system. And this is the scene that the Kentucky State Police insisted showed no evidence of a fire. There is lots of evidence that I uncovered. I went into this pretty much with an open mind, and I uncovered so much evidence that really was disturbing. For example, here's a list on the left of the nightclubs that burned leading up to the 77 Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. Look at these. Every year, a nightclub burned, and in every case, they were either arsons or listed as suspicious causes. And in several, they proved the use of accelerants. So this is not something that should surprise anybody that the Supper Club also burned. It followed a pattern of these nightclubs burning every year as the mob and had their wars and their disputes and their takeovers. And here we have on the right a memo where an anonymous, an unnamed person whose name has been redacted walked into an FBI office and said he was on an airline flight and overheard two men from RJ, Kentucky, discussing burning the Beverly Hills Supper Club. And they went into great specifics. The interesting part about this is that it occurred weeks before the club burned. The Kentucky State Police claimed that they conducted an investigation. You can't find any record of it. If they have it, I'm not sure you can find it with the warrant. That's just among the other list of other criminal evidence here. The Schillings, it was confirmed in a 1979 investigation, and again in the 1980s and the 90s, that a threatening letter that was made of cutout letters from a magazine was left at their mailbox on the night of the fire, which said, "We burned you down once, we'll burn you down again. You keep building, we'll keep burning." There were several eyewitnesses I talked to who saw two air conditioning men working in the zebra room on the day of the fire, and that room had no air conditioning. These men were hostile, and according to one of the waitresses who saw them and confronted them, they were very scary. There was damage to the air handling equipment, as we discussed. There was immediate destruction of the evidence in the zebra room where the fire originated. A Cincinnati fire captain who was there with his family that night testified that fires that are accelerated act this way. I've never in my life seen a normal fire travel like that one. There were also reports by several witnesses of a crew that was in the club the day of the fire, wiping down the walls in the Hall of Mirrors with a milky liquid that may have been an accelerant, and in fact fits the description of liquid graphite, which is an intense accelerant used in some arsons. And that was exactly, the Hall of Mirrors was where the fire traveled from the zebra room right into the cabaret room. We also have David Brock's account that Dick Schilling, who was very close to him, told him personally, "They burned me out." And we have that FBI tip about the threats. There's lots more in the book, This is just scraping the surface. Here to wrap up, just a little nostalgia. I've had the privilege of speaking to many people since this book came out, and it's been a real joy to hear their stories. And it's, as I said, there's hardly anybody who hasn't been brushed by this history and the tragedy. And there are many tragic stories in this book, and I tried to do justice to the victims and the survivors. And believe me, they're very sad stories, and probably some of you have stories to share that way. But it's also interesting to look back and remember what a jewel the supper club and country club used to be. What just a spectacular draw this was throughout the Midwest and the nation. Just a very small sample of the people who performed there. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, who was a dealer at the country club. He got his start with Jerry Lewis performing in clubs in Newport. Marilyn Monroe was there, Phyllis Diller, Don Rickles, Jerry Lee Lewis, on and on the performers go. It's just fun to remember the glory years. And this menu here is signed by Ozzie and Harriet Nelson as just a reminder of what a spectacular place that used to be. The book has many pictures. I was fortunate to work with the Kenton County Library with their archives and others, and just a gold mine of pictures of those glory days of the club. Finally, again, for those of you who may not want to know where to purchase, here's the details, and just go to chilidogpress.com, and I'll be glad to sign a book for you and put it in the mail. We did have a slowdown on shipping around Christmas, but right now they seem to be shipping pretty quickly, usually a 3 or 4 day turnaround. So Tara, I guess I'd be glad to answer questions. I hope we have some good ones.
We have a lot of good questions. I know we were contacted in advance with a lot of people asking where to purchase the book. So I'm glad that you were able to put that out there. And actually, I will do my best to copy the link into the chat here while we're talking. There we go. In case anybody just wants to copy it and buy one right now. Let's see here. So good. Okay, let me get started here. There were a lot of really good questions, and I will let everybody watching. So we actually have a maximum audience of 100, and we have exceeded that, which is exciting. It's a good problem to have. So we have a number of viewers on Facebook right now. And so I just want to let those that are watching on Facebook know that if you have a question, you can post it in the comments section, and I will try to answer those as well, or ask them for you to answer as well.
Sure.
Okay, so starting off, just to kind of set the stage here, and yeah, we have plenty of time. Was there something about Northern Kentucky that just made it, more susceptible to this kind of organized crime, behavior? What made it sort of a destination or a place where that kind of activity could thrive like it did?
That's an excellent question. I go into this in the book to lay the groundwork and the context. Many of you may have heard the name of George Remus, who's another legend in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky. Well, George Remus, you can go all the way back to the Civil War when General Hooker was stationed in Northern Kentucky, and the famous legendary Hookers got their name with the troops. But really, I believe it starts with George Remus, who set up his bootlegging operation in Northern Kentucky for a couple of reasons. The geographical location gave him easy access to all the highways to reach the major sales points in the Midwest and the East Coast. And also because it was so much easier to buy the police and corrupt the local government on a small scale than it would have been if you tried to run that in Cincinnati. George Remus became, bar none, the greatest, biggest bootlegger in the United States. And he was running so much bootleg liquor, it was unbelievable. But he eventually was arrested and put in prison. And when he went away to prison, his gang went with him. And these guys that we've talked about, Red Masterson, Pete Schmidt, Buck Brady, were all members of George Remus's gang. And when they got out of prison, the first thing they did was go back to Northern Kentucky and go right back into bootlegging and opening clubs. And then the interesting thing too, and I try not to go too long, but it's key to the name of the book too, is Forbidden Fruit, because I'm trying to get across the point that we all want what we can't have. We want that forbidden fruit. And people who came to Northern Kentucky from Cincinnati and all over Northern Kentucky looked the other way for their bootleg liquor. Meanwhile, we're also looking the other way for prostitution, gambling, corruption, murder, violence, all the things that came walking in the door with that bootleg booze, because that's the bargain you make when you make a deal with the underworld.
Gotcha. Wow. Very, very interesting. And there's a lot more questions coming in. So we'll just keep on going. Let's go to a little bit before the fire. There's a question about JFK. And specifically, there's a picture that you showed where of him in Northern Kentucky. And so there's a question of where was that? Do you happen to know?
I've been told that it's on Dixie Highway. I think I'm not really sure. It may be in the book, but a lot of these details after working on it, I'm kind of having a hard time. But some people who are probably in your audience right now will be able to recognize it, because people called me up after looking at that picture in the book and said they knew where it was.
Okay, so we've got two who say Carruthers Road in Newport. There we go. Okay.
Okay, good.
So keeping going with the JFK theme, you mentioned the link to his death in the book. Do you want to elaborate on that, or do you want everybody to check out the book?
Well, I don't want to give away too much, but I can tell you this. I did a Freedom of Information request to the FBI vaults, where all of the classified information is contained. And after it's been declassified, after a certain number of years, you can make requests and you never know what you're going to get. You just plug in keywords, and I plugged in keywords, and what I ended up with was 3 discs of information packed with just a treasure trove of wiretaps of mobsters by Bobby Kennedy. And those were, for the most part, illegal wiretaps that Bobby Kennedy ran right into the casino where Mo Dallas made his had his meetings in Las Vegas at the Desert Inn. And in these meetings, the mobsters talk very openly, because they don't know they're being wiretapped, about killing the Kennedys. Again, Hoffa at one point asked the leader of the organized crime in New Orleans, the mob boss there, if he would kill Jack Kennedy. And he even proposed the method should be in an open car by a sniper from behind in a southern city. And this is all on tape in these wiretaps. It was just stunning, and there's so much more that will lead you in that direction. For example, a 1979 revisit of the congressional investigation of the Warren Commission, the staffer who led that said to him that in his opinion, after the investigation, it was an absolute moral certainty that the mob killed Jack Kennedy.
Wow. Well, I know that I'm not quite at that point in the book yet. It's hard for me to stay up late sometimes after the kids go to bed, but I'm really intrigued to get to that point and read more. So let's move on to the fire a little bit. And actually, I've got one other question that's a little bit more sort of around that time. Kim
Sure.
Brake has written here in the comments, her great aunt was married to a professional gambler who frequented Newport, and she would come to family holiday gatherings in fur coats dripping in diamonds. You mentioned the Kenton County Library. They have so many amazing archives. Would you recommend the library as a place for additional research if she's looking for, genealogy or one particular person?
Oh, absolutely. And I would also encourage her to go to my website. There's a blog section there to share stories. Anybody listening now, if you want to go there and share your stories, I'd really like to encourage people to do that, because it would be such a shame to lose these and not share them among ourselves, because these are primary sources. The other thing that's interesting about that is when Ron Goldfarb came to Northern Kentucky, he knew that this was hundreds of millions of dollars were being made out of Newport, and he expected it to look really cool and glitzy. And he said he was shocked at how rundown it was because the mob was taking all the money out. So, some people made it pretty big, but Newport did not thrive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's see. So let's go back to JFK for a second. Well, a little before. Deborah Blake writes a question. Was there animus between Mafia and the Kennedys over bootlegging before RFK and JFK? Okay, so like before, I guess they were maybe more in the public eye. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, the interesting history there is that Bobby Kennedy watched Estes Kefauver and saw how that propelled him to national attention and even put him on the ticket as a VP candidate. And he wanted to do the same. So he went after the mob, much to the dismay of his father, who had worked very closely with the mob in bootlegging himself. Mm-hmm. And Sam Giancana often bragged publicly that he elected JFK by delivering votes from cemeteries and fraud in Chicago. So when Bobby Kennedy goes after the mob as Attorney General, this is the ultimate betrayal to the organized crime figures. They have supported this guy. They thought they had him in their pockets because of Joe Kennedy, and they delivered Jack to the White House. And here it is. That's unforgivable in those circles.
Wow. Okay. That is really interesting. So I don't even have any like comeback for that. Like, wow, that's crazy. I obviously needed to read a little bit more about that point in history. So now we're going to move on to the fire. Kathy Kottmeyer wrote very early in the presentation, why wasn't the Kentucky governor investigated when he had part of the building bulldozed over so soon after the fire? What, any response about that?
We only learned much later. There's a section in my book, and backing up again, when I approached this story, I thought, I've heard the stories of conspiracies and cover-ups, but it's really going to be hard to believe that went all the way to the governor's office. But then when I did the research and found out that the governor's investigative team to investigate the fire, there was, I think there were 7 members, and only one of the 7 was not completely mired in corruption for his career. And we can see that now going back as we look back. The governor, for example, was disgraced. We later found out that he was involved in a sex scandal, that he was probably compromised because of that. He would have been just such an easy target for underworld blackmail and extortion. He, besides that, was among one of the most corrupt governors in Kentucky history, which is saying a lot. So when you looked at each member of that group that investigated the fire, it's shocking. I think the reason is that they controlled the narrative and they got in front of it right away, and the media ran with whatever they were told, as the media always does. I'm a longtime member of the media. We have to rely on government officials for our first draft of history in most cases. And people that was the story, and that's been what was written in stone, and it has persisted.
Let's see. It's just really interesting. I guess hindsight helps, right? To have all those files and to be able to kind of look back and see what happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was shocking.
For sure. In your sources, talk about that for a little bit. I was looking at the back of the book, and you do a really nice job of going over, some of the firsthand accounts as well as records. I mean, you have if anybody who hasn't read the book yet, there's pages and pages of source material in here. Talk a little bit about how did you sort through all of these different accounts and try to put something together?
Well, I guess I'd have to credit my decades of experience as a reporter and editor and columnist, because that's the training for this kind of thing. Yeah. It's the research. And if you love investigative reporting or solid reporting, which is really just investigative reporting, it involves that joy of finding the detail, the fact, the little moments of epiphany and aha. When, like, for example, to find out that you're looking through these people who are on the governor's commission to investigate, you go, again? Again, another one is corrupt. So yeah, that would be a big part of it. And Plus, I just love telling a story and filling in the spaces. There was so much to research, and the FBI files, the National Archives were really helpful. The Kennedy Library, the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. There is a tremendous, and I have to credit also books that have been written on this topic in advance of me that were really did a great job of getting the facts on the record. So there's a ton of stuff out there, and I could have done so much more, but building a book that was twice as long as this would be a big ask.
For sure, for sure. So let's see, Michelle would like to know, did you interview Rick or Ron Schilling for your book? And actually, I was about to ask, Charles Jacobson had to ask, what was your impression of the Schilling? So we'll just combine all of that into one question.
I did not interview any of the Schillings, and I really would have liked to. I asked around a lot to see if I could track anybody down who would know how to get in touch with them. But they're long gone from this area. I hope maybe I can hear from them. I thought that Dick Schilling, in many ways, was such a trailblazer and a innovator. For example, Jeff Ruby, who has some of the nicest restaurants anywhere in the Midwest. He's in the book, and he says, his inspiration for his restaurants came from Dick Schilling. Dick Schilling was the master entertainer, the first innovator of the culinary entertainment that we see today with the shows. So in that way, I credit him a lot, but boy, did he cut a lot of corners building that place too. So he's culpable in that way. I'm gonna leave it to readers to come up with their own opinion of the Schillings. I tried to lay it out, but not, I think what some of the sons did during that night was heroic, and they deserve credit for that, to try to save as many people as they could.
Let's see, we have a few more minutes, and we do have some questions on Facebook. So let's see. Well, someone asked if we could post this on our YouTube channel, and we will do that following the presentation, probably in the next day or so. Bill Terry would like to know, what are the major differences between your book and Bob Webster's book, Beverly Hills Supper Club, The Untold Story?
I would say the approach is entirely different. Mine is more comprehensive. I try to get into the history more deeply for the greater context. Where they really did an outstanding job was focusing on the fire itself. Their context leading up to it is much thinner. I spent a lot more time in the context to the buildup. So the fire itself is really only the final chapter of my book. The other thing is they did a very well-researched and footnoted, indexed, factual presentation in a nonfiction way. I fictionalized parts of my book to move the story and to make it more entertaining, so that people, the things that are said by my fictional characters are in every instance true to the historical record, but it makes it so much easier to move the story and make it knit together that way. So I really enjoyed that. It's more of a entertaining read, I would say.
I know from my standpoint, reading at the beginning so far, it's been helpful to understand that, like, kind of like you were saying, setting that stage of, wow, this is kind of the situation that we have ourselves in Northern Kentucky, not personally being present at that time. It was helpful to understand the environment, that was going on. So I want to ask you something else. We've got a few minutes left. You've been a journalist your entire career. You've written some books. I've got to know, after this, which is, really cataloging such a monumental event, not only in our local history, but our nation's history, what is next? Are you going to just kind of focus on cars, or are you going to write another book?
Oh, I'm going to have to write another book, because there's nothing like the joy of writing. And when you turn a phrase just right, or hit that figurative language that sings, it really it touches something in my brain of that creative spirit. And so I'm going to have to write something else. I have no idea what it'll be right now. I'm really missing this one actually, because I'd love to write more, but the book is finished. So I don't know. I'm open to suggestions. If anybody has some great stories they want to pass on to me, I'd be glad to consider something. But to me, this is the ultimate, maybe the biggest story. I don't even say maybe anymore in our regional history, because where else nothing compares. The Who concert, the floods, nothing compares to this. This was our big event.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said, I think before this, before the Zoom started, this is something that every single person in Northern Kentucky, or even in the Commonwealth, has some kind of connection to, or their family does. And so,
Yes.
this audience, as I predicted, Peter, has lots more to say about this. And so
Good.
we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to take probably about 2 or 3 more questions and try to just keep us going till the end. I got a couple of things I want to say at the end, but we will keep going. Let's see. So Carl just wanted to note that some of the big name performers from Beverly Hills Supper Club would do promotional guest appearances on the Ruth Lyons show. So it was kind of highlighting all of that, which was really interesting. And then somebody had here that they were an employee at NKU during the fire. They were among a few people from the university who were able to visit the burned out club days after the fire. And he says he has some items. He wants to know where he should donate those. And there's been some commentary in the chat about where would be good. But I'm wondering, from your standpoint, Peter, is there anything for physical items that you've seen any particular place in Northern Kentucky? I know Behringer Crawford would obviously love to be able to display those to the public, but I think Fort Thomas might have some spots. Have you seen anything in particular?
Well, we don't know yet what the new developers are going to do there. If they end up putting together some kind of a memorial or museum or a shrine of some kind, that's still in the development stage, I guess. But gosh, I would certainly consider any museum where they could be shared with the public. And really, it'd be nice if there was one central place that would honor the victims and put all these things together, along with the literature, the books, the pictures. It could be such a spectacular exhibit and would mean a lot, I'm sure, to the victims. And I'd say one more thing. I interviewed a lot of the victims and their families, and I could not find any of them who thought this was an accident.
Yeah. Let's see. I totally agree. And I appreciate that your site has places for people who want to share stories of the victims to be able to do that. As I was telling Peter before this, actually some of my dad's neighbors were victims, and they were not even from Northern Kentucky. That was back in Ashland. Judith, we appreciate that. Judith at Fort Thomas Museum also does have some artifacts, and I've seen their tribute to some of the victims as well. Let's see. Oh, Lori Risch, who is our executive director of Behringer Crawford Museum, did say that BCM has the court clerk's chair and copies of the court proceedings from Ratterman's trial at the museum. So, well, one more. Let's see. Oh, it was just a thank you. So Paul Whalen wanted to know, and this is on Facebook. I think we kind of covered this in the Zoom chat, and then I realized that Paul couldn't see that. Just to clarify, the governor that we were talking about in during the time of the fire, that was Julian Carroll, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then Paul wanted to say, are we saying that he was part of the cover-up? So just thought maybe can end on a little controversial note there, Peter. So.
Well, I'm going to say you're going to have to read the book to decide that for yourself. We'll leave it as a teaser. I think you can draw your own conclusions for sure.
Wonderful. Well, we'll be able to check in with Paul actually next week, because he is actually our guest speaker next week.
Oh,
So,
good.
Peter, I want to say thank you so much to you for joining us. I hope everyone checks out this very interesting read, and we hope we see you again soon with whatever your next project brings.
Well, thank you,
Um,
Tara.
and for next week, for those of you that are with us, we would love to have you back. Paul Whelan is going to talk about his profiles of Kentucky's United States senators from 1792 to the present. Our senators have been in the press a lot lately, so I'm sure he will have a lot of interesting things to say about those senators, both present and past. So in the meantime, we would love for you to become a member of Behringer Crawford Museum. Please go to our website, bcmuseum.org, to find out more. And you can watch this. If one of your friends wasn't one of the lucky 100 to get in, they can watch the recording on Facebook or on YouTube. So until next week, take care, everybody. See you soon. Good night.
Good night.
Bye, Peter.
Good night. Good job.